We hope you will enjoy. This tape deals with coverage of the Rolls-Royce F Head engine, as seen in the post-war six-cylinder cars. Beginning with an overall view of the right-hand side of the engine, we can see the complexities involved with this engine or any six-cylinder or eight-cylinder engine. On top we see the carburetors, here only one, intake manifold, dropping down now we move in on the oil pressure relief valve. Moving inside the engine, we can see the crankshaft and the big end of a sectioned connecting rod. Moving up a little, we see a piston, the top of the connecting rod, and its wrist pin. Moving to the front, we have located the generator, or dynamo. Once again, an overall view. Here we see all the mechanical mechanism in motion. Closing in, we have a look at the SU carburetor. This is the H4 type, early. Raising of the air piston, exposing the tapered needle, which is sliding in and out of the jet, located at the bottom. Here we have the float chamber. As the float rises, it must shut off the needle valve, closing off the fuel flow. Down below, the operation of the jet to lean and richen the mixture. In the Mark VI version with twin SU carburetors, there is a little-known balance hole between the front and rear halves separating the two carburetors. Now we pick up the floating oil strainer attached to the oil pump, which pumps its oil through this pipe into the oil pressure relief valve, high and low pressure. In front of us now is the bigger spring, or the high pressure spring, regulating high pressure oil, 20 to 25 pounds, to the main bearings of the engine. On the other side, we have the smaller spring, or low pressure spring, which delivers oil to the rocker arms and the timing cover, the front gear case, at about 3 to 5 pounds pressure. Oil to the rocker arms travels up that pipe into drilled holes in the head to the arms, and through this pipe forward through a spigot to the wheel case. Behind now, we see the main oil galley, which delivers the high pressure oil to the main bearings. Oil travels upwards and then to the rear and to the front of this main oil galley. Here we see the sectioned end of a connecting rod, showing the crankshaft journal, the thin wall bearing shell, the connecting rod with its drilling for channeling oil to the wrist pin. Moving upward, we see the top end of the same assembly with the piston assembly with its rings for oil control and compression control, the skirt of the piston. Here we have the wrist pin, which runs in a bronze bushing, and the upper drilled portion of the connecting rod itself. A little known feature of the F Head engine is the fact that it has a very small drilled hole through the connecting rod to supply oil to the thrust side of the cylinder walls. This hole oftentimes becomes blocked. Another angle of the squirt hole in the thrust side of the connecting rod, showing now the front two pistons and connecting rods in motion. Jumping ahead now, we look at the front end of the engine. On the top is a thermostat in its housing. This thermostat is sprung in its open position. It will be removed here, and you can see the access for the bypass for when the thermostat is closed. The assembly is located in its housing by a dowel pin to correctly locate the bypass opening. Here we have the front end of the engine again, showing the camshaft gear and the slipper flywheel. There's the teeth of the cam wheel. The thrust button located on the front timing cover. Now the slipper flywheel with the pressure springs, the pressure plate assembly itself, behind which is a friction washer, and located there are two of the 4 to 8 driving springs. Another view of the same assembly. Once again, the cam wheel, the thrust button, behind which is the spring-loaded plunger which controls the camshaft end float. Moving along now to the left side of the F Head engine. Here we see camshaft and valve lifters in motion, showing the twisting action imparted to the lifters by their offset of the camshaft. There we see the push rods operated from below by the cam followers. Here we have two exhaust valves shown in their guides with their springs and lifters below. There are no valve stem seals of any type on the exhaust valves of the F Head engine. Here we have the distributor and the oil pump drive gear driving from the gear located centrally on the camshaft. Shown now, the floating oil pickup, And now the two gears in the oil pump itself. Moving rearward, we see the starter and starter drive mechanism. In the front, the planetaries moving back to the drive gear and the friction clutch assembly. Once again, the reduction gears, the shaft and the main drive gear, and the housing for the clutch assembly and the rearmost support bearing. The drive itself consists of 5 to 7 Ferodo disc washers. The topmost item on the engine is the distributor. It is of a dual point type with a mechanical advance. There you can see the mechanical weights being activated. Viewed from above, we see inside the cap the central contact and the 6 contacts around which are located. Here we see the rotor and the points in motion. The points fire alternately, supplying current to the plugs with 3 lobes on the camshaft for greater charging time of the primary circuit. These points should be set at 19 to 21 thousandths. In the rear now, viewed from above, we have the manual gearbox, shown first in neutral, then in first, now into second, now in third, and finally in fourth. Now into reverse. We'll run through them again. First, second, third, fourth, and now neutral. Here in the front of the engine we see the water pump with its bearing and spindle, the flinger assembly, the carbon gland, behind which is located the rubber seal, the spring, and the seal retainers within the rotor. The head section from the rear here reveals the intake valve with its inner and outermost spring, its rocker arm, the valve itself. Now shown in motion, the push rod can be seen to operate the rocker arm, thus opening and closing the valve. Proper valve clearance here is 6 thousandths when adjusted cold, 12 thousandths on the exhaust valve. From behind we can see the head of the intake valve on the right, and on the left we can just catch the exhaust valve, opening and closing. A different view of the same area. There we have the exhaust valve. It is obvious watching this why proper valve timing is essential. Here we have an overhead view of the rocker arm assembly. The hollow rocker shaft, yellowed, painted to represent oil flow. Oil is fed to the rocker arm shaft by a drilling in the head, comes up through the pedestal into the shaft, out on top of the valve through the drilling there, the hollow shaft. Oil must also go to the other end, to the push rod end of the rocker arm, feed down the push rod to lubricate the lifters or cam followers. We should point out here too that the green represents water, the blue represents intake, and the red painted areas represent the exhaust. Closing in here slightly, we can see the carburetor heat pipes supplying heated engine coolant to the intake manifold. Now we'll have a look at the generator. Here showing the rear end or the commutator end. It is here that the generator brushes themselves will be found. A side view showing the entire armature assembly. The front and the rear section of the field windings. Moving on now, we see the clutch. The throwout bearing in action, compressing the pressure springs, releasing the pressure on the driven disc, thus disengaging. You can note the pipe and the slight trough necessary for catching oil and delivering oil to the throwout bearing. If that pipe does not line up with the trough, you lubricate your clutch instead of the throwout bearing. Here we see the action of the clutch assembly. Once again, the pressure plate and the driven disc.